The room is silent. Putin stares at his orders. The war is a signature away. His generals wait. His hand trembles. And then he hesitates. He sees a future drowning in blood. He hears the cries of grieving mothers. On February 24th, 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. This invasion sparked the largest and deadliest war in Europe since World War II. And the threat of an even bigger global conflict still looms over us. But imagine this: what if Vladimir Putin had never given the order to invade Ukraine 3 years ago? What would today look like in that alternate reality? In a silent room, a pen drops. A single word escapes Putin's lips.
Nyet!
In a buzzing Kyiv bar, a vodka Red Bull slips from Dmitro's hand, a Ukrainian tech geek crashing onto Alexei's phone, a Russian partygoer from Moscow. Tension flickers, then fades into laughter. Instead of arguing, they talk about code, about innovation, about a world without borders. That spilled drink sparks something bigger. They create No Fronts, a platform breaking down language and political barriers, connecting people from conflict zones. No Fronts becomes a global sensation. It brings Dmitro and Alexei to an unlikely place: the Eurovision Song Contest in Tel Aviv. Not as artists, but as guests, sharing their story. On TV, a historic moment replays, October 7th last year, the day Israel made peace with Saudi Arabia. Since then, the Middle East has enjoyed an unprecedented era of stability. Across the room, a Syrian refugee listens. Soon, he will return to Damascus, one of a million heading home after years of exile. Syrian President Assad has tightened his grip, bringing order and inviting them home. In Europe, this shift weakens populist parties. The fear of migration fades, and with it, their political power. Dmitro and Alexei glance around. Israeli flags dominate youth fashion. Meanwhile, older generations in Europe try to start a conversation. They speak of forgotten injustices, of Palestine, of occupation. But they are dismissed.
Free Palestine!
That's ancient history, old man.
Dmitro and Alexei exchange a glance. This was never their vision of unity. But then, in the crowd, they spot something. Two rivals turned friends, a Turkish Cypriot and a Greek Cypriot laughing together, using their app. Alexei grins, taking a sip of vodka Red Bull.
Nope, not spilling my drink on your phone again, bro.
They don't need to say more. They feel it. How one choice changed millions of lives. At that exact moment, Vladimir Putin jolts awake, drenched in sweat. He refuses to watch Eurovision. But this nightmare? Far worse. In his dream, he had given the order to invade Ukraine. He saw the blood, the destruction, the shattered families. His heart pounds. He gasps for breath. And then a single thought floods his mind.
Phew. Thank God it was just a dream, and not reality.
And yet, that is not the world we live in. Reality is far crueler. Back to our world. Russian President Putin did give the order, and hundreds of thousands of young men in the prime of their lives have been wiped off the face of the earth. Back to 3 years earlier. 6 a.m. Kyiv is still cloaked in darkness when the ground trembles. A deep, roaring blast fills the air. Windows shudder, walls shake. People jolt awake. Some reach for their phones, others for their children. Panic spreads. Confusion reigns. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has begun. Putin calls it a special military operation aimed at denazifying Ukraine and protecting Russian-speaking citizens in Donetsk and Luhansk. But what does that really mean? For millions of Ukrainians, it means fleeing their homes, hiding in basements, fighting for survival. For the world, it's the biggest shock since the Cold War. To understand why Russian tanks are rolling through Ukrainian cities, we need to go back in time, far back. The Soviet Union collapses, ending nearly 70 years of communist rule. Overnight, Russia loses its superpower status. 20 new countries are born, many of them turning away from Moscow, seeking closer ties with the West. Economic turmoil, political instability. Russia is ravaged by poverty and corruption. For Vladimir Putin, this is the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. US Secretary of State James Baker meets Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. During their meeting, Baker whispers into Gorbachev's ear,
NATO will not expand an inch eastward if Russia allows German reunification.
Gorbachev agrees. The Berlin Wall falls. The Cold War ends. Russia retreats. In the years that follow, NATO expands. East Germany joins, followed by Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. Eventually, even former Soviet republics like Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania become NATO members. To Putin, this is a betrayal. But to the West, the not an inch eastward promise of James Baker only referred to NATO not stationing troops in former East Germany, not to future expansion. Gorbachev later confirmed there was never a formal agreement blocking NATO enlargement. In the 90s, former Soviet states negotiated their own NATO membership. NATO didn't force them. Eastern European nations, haunted by memories of Soviet rule, chose NATO for protection and a future aligned with Western democracy. And then, Ukraine. NATO promises a vague and not immediately realized future membership to Ukraine and Georgia, despite objections from Germany and France. To Putin, this crosses a line, his red line. Ukraine, a country with deep historical and cultural ties to Russia, must never join NATO. For Putin, it's not just about politics. It's about security, identity, and legacy. Ukraine faces a choice: sign a trade agreement with the European Union, embracing a Western future, or accept a lucrative financial deal from Russia, staying in Moscow's orbit. President Viktor Yanukovych chooses Russia. The Ukrainian people disagree. In Western Ukraine, closer to Europe, they see their future with the West. Protests erupt on Maidan Square, first peaceful, then violent. Police crackdowns, gunfire, death. Yanukovych flees to Russia. A new pro-Western government takes power. To the West, it's a victory for democracy, a popular uprising with Western sympathy. To Putin, it's a Western-backed coup. Russian troops without insignias appear in Crimea. A referendum is held under Russian military presence. 96% allegedly vote to join Russia. The West condemns it as an illegal annexation. The vote took place under military pressure and is not internationally recognized. Putin defends it, arguing Crimea is historically Russian and home to Russia's Black Sea naval base in Sevastopol, a strategic military asset he cannot afford to lose. While the world watches Crimea, another conflict ignites. In the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, pro-Russian separatists declare independence. What starts as a regional protest escalates into a brutal war. Russia supplies weapons, money, and volunteer fighters, but denies direct involvement. Ukraine fights back. The West imposes sanctions on Russia, but avoids military intervention. By 2022, over 14,000 people have died, including the 298 passengers on Malaysia Airlines flight MH17, shot down over eastern Ukraine in 2014. And millions of people are displaced. The Minsk agreements are signed to broker peace, but are never fully implemented. For 8 years, the war in eastern Ukraine simmers, mostly out of international headlines. Until everything changes. Hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers storm Ukraine from the Russian border. Putin announces a special military operation to liberate Ukraine from Western influence and protect Russian speakers. But Ukraine does not surrender. President Volodymyr Zelensky stays in Kyiv, defiantly declaring, "I need ammunition, not a ride." He becomes a symbol of resistance, inspiring his people to fight back. The West responds: severe economic sanctions against Russia, military aid and weapons for Ukraine, diplomatic condemnations from all over the globe. But Putin is determined. For him, Ukraine is non-negotiable. This is not just a war of bullets and bombs. It's a war of narratives, propaganda, and competing versions of the truth. Russia claims it's defending itself from NATO expansion and protecting ethnic Russians. The West argues that the Ukrainians are fighting for sovereignty and democracy. Both sides accuse each other of disinformation. Both paint themselves as heroes and the other as villains. The truth? That depends on who you ask. What do you think? Did Putin have valid reasons to invade sovereign Ukraine? Or does he belong behind bars in The Hague? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Because next time, I'll be asking myself again,